Fine.
Okay, so that is log. Here we go. We are now live in the webinar. That's amazing. So I will welcome everyone who's already coming in. I will also give everyone like an extra minute to be able to join on time. Some webinar hygiene before we get into the topic of hiring high-performing SaaS sales leaders and what you're missing with Keith and George. Some webinar hygienics is that we will be rolling for 60 minutes. There is a question on the side of your screen where you can put your questions in if you want me to be able to push them up on the screen to the speakers. We will very soon go into introductions. There's also a chat. Feel free to put in where you're coming from and tuning in from in the chat, and any type of commentary. Feel free to have conversations there. If you want questions, put them under questions. And today we are joined by two amazing leaders. We will talk about hiring sales leaders, which is a very interesting topic. And with that in mind, I will move us over to the panel so we can actually see our participants right here. Hello, guys. So let's start with some introductions. I would hand it over to Keith to start, and then George can go, and then I can go at the end. So go ahead, Keith. Who are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm Keith Rabkin, the president of PandaDoc. I've been at PandaDoc, which is a contract management and e-signature sales proposal provider, for about 2.5 years, running all go-to-market, and it's been an amazing ride. We do a mix of PLG and sales-led motion, so lots of fun.
Sounds like you have a lot of experience on the topic we're going to address today. That's perfect. So George, over to you.
Yeah, no, my name is George. I work at various places currently, actually, but my primary engagement is with Break the Box, working with revenue acceleration for B2B SaaS companies, advisor, management consultant, fractional leader, and anything in between there. And actually, before we jumped in, my experience is quite similar to Keith's. I was at PandaDoc's competitor Scribe for quite a while, actually. So we almost turned this session into an e-sign fireside chat.
But well, George, I'm gonna learn about all the things that you did to hire great sales leaders at Scribe.
Yes. So that part we can talk about. But that's about me. Over to you, Sarah.
Great. Thank you, guys. So my name is Sarah. I have been in revenue for 22 years now. I went into SaaS 2012, and I have mainly been focusing my career on in sales roles and in sales leader roles for sales and marketing tech, right? So within prospecting tools, marketing automation, CRM, this type of space, because it's the best job in the world, sales. So it's fun to be able to provide good system solutions for sales teams. As a consultant at Break the Box and also a co-founder, I now do a lot of different projects when it comes to go-to-market, and also when it comes to basically going in, increasing ACV, increasing ARR, and be able to minimize the sales cycle and work with actually delivering more revenue on the same people we have, right? And with that in mind, a lot of the companies that we work with, and I'm sure Keith have similar experiences in his company, one of the biggest challenges is not to hire salespeople. It is to hire good leaders for those salespeople. So that's why we really want to dive into this topic, because it seems to be a struggle across the globe in SaaS to hire good sales leaders. We have a tendency of recruiting still 2025 to recruit people who are good as individual contributors, which is not a great way to go about it. And I think we can all agree to that. So one of the things that I wanted to start with, I will put the first question to discuss up on the table so we can see it. And that is, what are the qualities of great sales leaders and how do you identify them? Because that's one of the challenges while we're hiring, right? So with that, I will actually move this over to George to start it off, because I know you have plenty of opinions on this. So let's go. Dive into
First of all, having done that journey myself, from basically SDR to CRO, right? I don't think that it's a bad move to move individual contributors into leadership, as long as their career track accounts for leadership training. Because closing doesn't mean that you can make other people close. These are two completely different skill sets. You have insights to give them. What I used to say to my teams is that I have made all mistakes you can, so you don't have to. So I screwed up for them, before them rather. So I don't think it's a bad idea as long as you look for the qualities and train them. When it comes to what qualities to look for, what I personally did for the heads of when I used to hire heads of or team leads when we hired externally is first of all, it's execution ability, because all of us are amazing in theory and we do PowerPoints and we do forecasts and we do stuff like that. But I want to work with people that will roll up their sleeves, get into the deals, get into the calls, push pipe forward, and have the ability to a large extent, either do what they're teaching or at least be able to contribute. And the second thing that I has always been very focused on execution. And I would advise when you interview people to ask for execution stories, not theory stories, not only end result, but what did you do practically to get that result? And one-to-ones is not that. One-to-ones is hygiene and numbers and reporting, but I would like to understand how customer facing these people were. I want all leaders that I work with to have contact with customers every day, ideally. Anything that is above us at the threshold should have those touch points. And the second component, the second characteristic or skill that I'm looking for, I suggest people to look for, is empathy. As out there as that might sound, it's very hard to lead any team successfully if you're not able to empathize with them, if you're not able to understand them. The first thing that I learned as a leader, as a young leader myself, is that people consume information and understand information very differently from each other. Some people understand and catch on super quick on verbal communication in a meeting like this. Other people want things in writing to digest in their own time. Either people need coaching. So understanding where people are coming from and be able to lead and coach accordingly is crucial. And that's my 2 cents, I think, on that for now. Not 2 cents, maybe more $5, but still.
We will move over to Keith, but the summary here is basically so empathy and actual experience to be able to retell what happened through a process, right? Rather than just saying what is on the paper that you should be doing, because that has never saved a quarter. I'm pretty sure we can all agree on that, right? So Keith, how about you? What do you think are the qualities that are super important? Because we will dive into how to identify them in a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think, George, I completely agree with you on the execution. I was personally going to say somebody who gets in the weeds. That is so important, right? They have to be able to inspect pipeline. They have to understand whether you have a true champion in the deal, whether you've gotten to power. They have to know how pricing works. They have to know how the competition stacks up. You've got to know those details to be a good leader for the company. On empathy, I mostly agree. It's interesting because empathy is one of PandaDoc's 4 core values. But I would broaden it a little more to say culture carrier. So depending on what the culture of your organization is, you want to make sure that your sales leader echoes that culture. So there are companies where, maybe empathy is not important in the company, right? Like it's a hard driving, just like this is the company where we go as hard as we can. And you want the sales leader to match that, because if you have a sales leader who maybe is a little bit different, suddenly you have this disconnect. But I think that culture match is really important. For me, 2 things I would add. One, which kind of goes to getting in the weeds, is an understanding of data. One of the biggest differences, I think, from going from individual sales IC to leader is now you're looking at like a larger business, right? You went from the business of your book to this book that exists across multiple reps. how do I understand how that's all performing? And what do the trends look like? I think even though sellers need to be forward-looking, a sales leader has got to be much more forward-looking, because you have to understand how the future quarters are going to progress. And I think that all starts with data. How's pipeline progressing? How are the different sources of pipeline changing over time? How well are we doing at closing? How is my ASP changing? And so on. So that's really important to me. And then the second one, which I think can be really hard, is a balance between the company perspective and the sales team perspective. So any sales leader I hire has to be thinking company first. And I said PandaDoc is this mix of PLG and sales led. How do you think about driving pipeline versus that PLG funnel? And we want to do what's best for the company, not what's best for the sales team. And that can be really hard for a sales leader, because your own KPIs are the sales numbers. And so making sure that this person can up level, especially at the more senior sales leader levels, to think about the company first is really important.
Yeah, and I have to agree with that, especially the time we're in right now, where I can see, at least, and we've discussed this in several webinars, that not just the rise of AI, but also the market changing, our sales teams will become smaller and target bigger accounts as a base, right? So when you sit as a middle manager and you're looking at your team and you want to keep your team members, this will not be in the best interest of the company. What is going to be in the best interest of the company is to have a smaller, more expertise team that can bring in higher ACV, right? This is going to be the trend that we see everywhere, which means that having the ego of the team and the size of the team control anything that you're doing moving forward will not be in the best interest of the company. So I really agree with that. And I want to add one more thing, because I really think that for me, there is one skill that makes you superior as a leader, and that is curiosity. We didn't mention this before, but curiosity can also lead to empathy, because curiosity leads to you understanding things, because you're asking much more questions than you would without curiosity. And I think that that's something that is a quality that is really important in this role. There are several ways of identifying that quality when you go through hiring process, as an example, but I think it's going to be key, because curiosity also breeds good people skills to understand other people and how they function, which is going to play well into your hands as a leader when you're also trying to manage top management, as an example, when you're a middle manager, while you're trying to protect and develop your team. So that would be my 2 cents actually to the discussion. When it comes to identifying these things, what do you guys think are the best ways of trying to identify? Because culture fit is a pretty wide grasp example, right? Like, it's a wide concept. Keith, how do you guys do it when it comes to identifying towards the core values that you guys have?
I mean, I always start with open-ended questions of the leader, in like, what kind of environment do they want to work with? And hopefully they've done some research on your company and they know what your values are, but it's a really good screen for the people who I think maybe don't live it. They'll start with, like, if they haven't done the research, they'll just say what they like working in. And then you can quickly see if that's a fit or not with what you've done. But then I always like to ask a second question. I think a lot of times in interviews, you ask one question and the person answers you back. You move on to the next question. But I try to always do like a second question where I'll dive deeper. Well, then, okay, that's an amazing answer that you believe in empathy as a leader. Tell me about a time when you were empathetic. And like, you can quickly see, right, if they're like really scratching their head on it, or is the answer feel superficial? I look for details. The more details they can give me, the more real it is. Versus at a very high level, it's very easy to say you're empathetic, but like, show me the empathy. And that's where I really try to dive in. So 1, open-ended questions, and 2, try to fetch details out of whatever high-level story they're giving you.
George, how about you?
Yeah, it depends on the skill. I focus a lot, as I said, I focus a lot on execution. So what I used to do in interviews, and still to this day actually, is to ask, and I think it's so important, to Keith's point. So it is very off-putting if you interview somebody specifically for management and they haven't done any homework. okay, then it's a bit of a red flag for me. Even if you're sourced, I mean, even if we headhunted, still having at least some understanding of what the company does and why you're sitting down is a show of how you operate, right? And the second part that has to do with execution is like, okay, so let's say that you get hired. What is your plan for the first 30 days? When do you, and I want to see sort of how fast people can think and problem solve, right? So you don't know the product in detail, you don't know the team. But if you have prior leadership experience, you should have at least basic hygiene factors. So doing an audit of your team, as an example, analyzing numbers, meeting with senior leadership, understanding your P&L, your budget, like all of these things, you should have sort of from the top of your head. If you tell me that I will spend a month in onboarding and then slowly maybe we can get in touch with customers and then, then it is, and that's not bad, but you can go to big companies and have that pace, right? You can go to, I don't know, Deutsche Telco or like you can go, maybe Telcos is a bad example, but you can go to any huge enterprise company and be sort of not invisible, but like sort of fall between the cracks a bit. But for companies like PandaDoc or Scribe or FSC that we're working on now, this is absolutely not possible.
George, I thought it was, I just think it's interesting because like your point on if they don't do homework. Well, if they don't do homework for an interview, are they going to do homework for the companies in your pipeline or the companies that are prospects that you want to get into pipeline? And to me, that's a pretty good indicator that they're not. So I completely agree with you on that one. And then the same thing with like, yeah, they may not know anything about your company, but are they action oriented? Like if they come in and they're like, yeah, in the first 30 days, I'm going to hop on customer calls and I'm going to listen, or I'm going to listen to Gong or Clary. I'm going to scrub the forecast. Like, then you know you've got a hands-on leader.
Yeah.
And you can anticipate. There may still be gaps, but at least you have a good sense of what will be within the realm of possibility.
Yeah, and to be honest, I feel it's even, yes, having a person that is of a slower pace can be worked around. The answer that I really don't like is people scratching their head on that question completely. It's like, okay, so you haven't, it's not second nature. So that's alarming. And B, you haven't really prepared for this at all. And I am a big believer, although it's a bit broad, I am a big believer to the quote that says, how you do anything is how you do everything. So if you're cruising over an interview and when it comes to the company, when it comes to what you're going to answer, when it comes to being prepared, the likelihood that you're prepared for team meetings or customer meetings or one-to-ones is unlikely in most scenarios.
Can we also sort of add that, at least for me, my perspective is that these things are, the problem isn't getting rid of the people from the process that do this, right? The main problem is not getting rid of the people who hasn't prepared, who's trying to cruise. These are pretty common warning flags pretty early on. The challenge that I see when we recruit leaders is the people who interview well, right? The people who interview and drive narratives well. And then we still end up in a situation where culture wasn't a fit, or where speed and urgency isn't there, or whatever it might be, right? Because one of the things that I want in the second, third interview in this process is them coming to me and dissecting what we're doing. Like by just doing a complete diagnostics on me, asking a lot of detailed questions about the team they're going to inherit, understanding case studies, discussing with me what the challenges is with the team, doing like a light audit on their own demise to better understand, can I do this role? Because a lot of the things as leaders, when we come into an inherit team, is going to be dependent on your ability to lead those team members and your ability to understand before you come in what you need to do with that team to the biggest extent that you can, right? And this is how I test for curiosity. Because if they don't come in and do that, then we're going to have a problem. Because if you're passive in the interview process, passive enough to not dare to challenge by coming in and being like, now I'm going to ask you questions. That's what I'm looking for in a leader, because that shows curiosity to what you're going to get on the table when you join and start. Because that should also lead what your 30, 60, 90 days should be. It should also lead to what onboarding should contain. It should also lead to who people that they should talk to the first month should be. The roles and the titles, right? So doing that audit in the way where we're trying to dig into and do a needs analysis, if you will, on the team you're supposed to run, because you are inheriting a team from another leader. It comes with its own unique set of challenges, unless you're going in as a country leader and you're supposed to build. But if you're looking at middle management, where you're replacing another person, I would say that that's my main, how I would look for curiosity specifically, right? Have you guys ever been in an interview hiring leaders where they do that to that extent? What do you guys say? Has it happened to you?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think those are great ways to show that curiosity. Another one that's I've had a couple people do that's completely stood out for me is people who've gone and scheduled a demo, right? They've actually gone through the sales process for PandaDoc, and they come out and they'll say, that your speed to lead was too slow, or, your rep didn't do the proper discovery, or in the demo, it was very generic. It wasn't tailored to my use case. I'm like, wow, like the fact that you went and did that and you had the curiosity to understand the perspective before you got here to know what you would be getting into is such a good sign of someone who is going to like peel that onion apart of your sales team and find ways to improve it. So that's been, I mean, it's not a necessity, but it's a really good indicator.
Because it's interesting, right? Because I feel like I've been going through my career before we started the consulting business, picking companies, right? That has been I've been headhunted a lot, but once I went out and I wanted to move for whatever reason, I picked companies that I wanted to work for based on whatever product and market share they had, or whoever was working there and the leadership and the culture they had. And for me, if I would ever to apply for a job at PandaDoc, I would know more than you guys know about your sales process, hopefully, before I came into that process, because I would have gone through these things. And for me, this feels like a natural thing to do. But it seems like it's not very common because it stood out to you, Keith, right? George, what has been your experience when it comes to sort of people standing out in interview processes that then turn out to be good? Because that's sort of an important point here.
Yeah, so I like people that challenge the process in itself. So ideally, and that's not only for leadership roles, that's for all roles in my opinion, that push me to sell the position as much to feel that, look, I will evaluate this properly, so give me a good picture of what your competition looks like. This is what I found in the market. I found that, for instance, if I interviewed somebody for Strive, so I know that I Googled around and I saw that PandaDoc is now moving into DACH. How do you guys compare? How do you doing against DocuSign? To first of all understand, is what I'm about to do sellable even? Like, am I taking a position, or am I joining a sinking ship, right? And then look to challenge a lot. So how do you build culture? What's your values? Stuff that I can't find on the website, or if I do find it on the website, or if they do find it on the website. I had a candidate, I remember, they saw the company values on the website. It's like, okay, this is super nice that you guys say that you champion these things. Give me examples. I want to understand how you guys actually implement, because I like people that cut through fluff and sort of almost demand answers. It's like, I want to understand. So tell me data points. The best case that I have seen is a person that went through, he basically did mystery shopping. So he registered for a demo, he went through the demo, he saw the entire funnel flow. So what the demo looked like, what follow-ups he got, how fast it was picked up, and he came with basically a case study. It's like, this is where I see gaps. If I were to manage this person, this is what I would do for coaching. This is what we can improve. This is what's good. And to be transparent, these things to do is not as big of a time investment if you're experienced. It's not that big of a time investment to do, which is an audit that I feel going into a CRO position, as an example, or a VP sales position, you should do for your own good, for your own career, right? I have a question to both of you, based on the companies you've been in and the structures that we are in now. Do you guys experience that it's a good thing or a common thing to hire senior leadership from ads when you announce roles? Do you really hire people that are that reply to ads as often? There is a sort of a stigma usually with ads, to my experience. I don't know what you guys think.
It depends on what they come in with. Because someone might see, let's say that OneFlow is hiring a CRO, right? Someone might see that and be like, ooh, I like OneFlow, I want to apply there. And then we'll go through the ad. But then whatever they send over will probably be pretty tailored to why they want to work at OneFlow. I think that one of the challenges is ongoingly that we assume that these people might not have a job, that's why they're coming from an ad. That might not always be true. But I think that the second part has to do with, rather than where they're coming from, more what the messaging is. Because we've all seen the generic send-ins, right? Those are unfortunately not gonna fly. Like, it's not gonna work anymore because there are millions of applicants to these roles. So if you want to stand out, you need to go way beyond the normal resume. And you need to have done your homework. I mean, I did just to reference back to PandaDoc, I did a share on you guys where I did an analytics. I did it on several companies. Several of you guys have now been webinar meeting, being in the webinars with us, right? And I did an analytics about where are you going. And I think that these type of research is super easy to do, and we should do them. So I wouldn't care where they come from. I would care what they have in the application and how they're hunting me. Because in some situations, people who just hunt me enough will get a conversation at least, no matter what is in their resume, unless it is really bad, right? Because they're hungry for doing something with the company that I'm hiring for. What is your take, Keith? How often do you hire people from ads?
I would say I would always have the ad up, and I would try to create that funnel. What we know is we're gonna have to be really picky in the funnel. But I think especially with the way AI is making its way into recruiting software now, it'll be easier to pick out the people that are attractive to your company. So I would keep it open, but I do think, and the benefit there is there may be companies that aren't on our radar that are really strong that we may not have considered. Right, our recruiters do a great job of going out and finding candidates who match the profile that we're looking for. But we may not be thinking about this one company that we never thought of, that is this regional player in a similar SaaS space and has a similar characteristics and similar selling motion. And we may not have cast that net, but we get that inbound interest. It's going to be a low probability, but it's not going to cost you a lot of money. It's not going to take a lot of time.
That actually leads me to another question for you guys when it comes to recruiting from outside of the SaaS space. So we're all in the SaaS space, right? Would you recommend to other SaaS companies to hire outside of SaaS when they're looking for an experienced leader? Is there benefits? Is there downsides to that? What do you think, Keith?
That's a tricky one. I think the most important one is making sure that it's a similar sales motion. So if you're working with a company like maybe that does rental agreements or something, where, because like in SaaS, one of the things that makes us unique is we have renewal. And I want someone who can think about, it's not a one-time sale. It's about this continued relationship with the customer. We tend to be land and expand. So I want somebody who's thinking about getting business that can sort of move in that direction. I want people who understand the way SaaS works. There may be other scenarios where that exists. Ads is interesting at the smaller scale of the ad space because you do have an ongoing relationship with the customer, even though it's not SaaS. you still have this, like, it's still digital like SaaS, you still have this ongoing relationship. They're not renewing, but they will have ongoing spend. So I think that can be interesting. And it brings like a different perspective that sometimes can be helpful.
Yeah, I think that for me, based on my experience, because I spent 2.5 years as head of revenue at an agency, we sold retainers, 12-month contracts that renewed, right? At, I don't know, 1.2 mil per year on ongoing customer work. And I have seen so many similarities between enterprise and mid-segment SaaS sales and consultancy. Because from a perspective of how you operate and how you drive and communicate with the customer committee, with the buyer committee, how you project manage those type of deals to come into close, and how you then work with ongoing conversations with customers, even if you're leading a sales team who are selling to that industry, that they are actually in ongoing contact with the customers even after they have signed, right? So I see a lot of consultative selling cross experiences between these two, if it is a consultancy organization of any kind, actually. George, what do you think? Would you hire people from outside of SaaS in a SaaS sales leadership role?
I will be the negative one out of the bunch now and say no, because I agree with both of you. There are similarities. At the end of the day, sales is sales. Methodology is methodology. If you've done it a lot, even if you're a generalist, you can probably perform. If I'm a CRO, my head is on the chopping board. My board of directors is breathing down my neck, especially if I'm coming out of COVID, as an example, where the expectations were in the freaking stratosphere when it comes to ARR growth. And you're telling me, would you get somebody from Accenture that sold consultancy before to come lead a sales team at a B2B SaaS company? No. Can they perform? Most likely. Will they perform in time or ramp up? Most likely, to my experience, no. It takes a bit of time to translate. It depends how much time I have in my hands. And I think that with SaaS, there are a lot of other things. It's how we work internally, its pace of operations, its level of technical understanding, level of understanding of customers' environments to be able to coach and advise, is pricing negotiations. There are a lot of things that are not unique, but quite niched with SaaS. Because renewals is one part and the way that contracts work, but pricing structures, negotiations, RFQs on that specific industry are different. So I will be the bad cop in this and say no.
Yeah, I will add that based on my experience, we did sell HubSpot CRM and marketing at the same time. So I guess we were selling software too. So maybe it doesn't fully count as Accenture. We were a smaller agency, right? I came in when we were number 7 and I exited when we were 45. So we were still a small shop. And I think that also breeds a lot more hunger than a consultant coming from Accenture. But I get what you mean. So I am curious now to dive into the common mistakes that you have seen, because that makes me excited to talk about when people fuck up and how we can help them not do that again. So common mistakes when hiring sales leaders, guys. What would you say are the top 3 that you have seen, like in your career? Keith, you get to start because I see that you're nodding. You have ideas, so tell us.
Yeah, we kind of alluded to it, but I think hiring somebody who's a mismatch for the ICP you have. So again, we specialize in selling to mid-market and smaller companies. If I go hire an enterprise sales leader, it's not going to be a good fit. I mean, it's not 100% going to be a bad fit, but you need someone who understands the different motion. Like most of these companies, you're not going to go, meet at an event. You're not going to go to their house. You're probably not running ABM campaigns against it. You can't go and afford to have like MDRs and SDRs and AEs all to go serve a customer who's going to bring in a $10,000 account. It's just not going to work from a unit economics perspective. So that's probably my number 1, is making sure you've got like the right go-to-market motion that your sales leader knows how to match against.
Right. So previous experience with that type of motion is what you mean. That's what we're looking for, to avoid that mistake of sort of hitting the wrong note with what they are experienced to do, right? Yeah,
and not just size of company, right? Like, is your sales leader going to own renewals? have they done that before? Renewals are really different than new business. If you're just hiring a new business role and they've done new business and renewals, great. But if you're hiring somebody who's only doing renewals and they've never done renewals before, you might be in for a shock, right? Like they may not know how to manage that process.
Yeah, NRR is a term they should be very comfortable with if you're looking at how to sort of land and expand too as well, right? So if you have that background, and would you look at it even if they had that background as an individual contributor, or would you have wanted them to have led a team doing that?
No, I think it's okay. I mean, if they've been a sales leader but done renewals as an IC, I think that's okay.
Because it's the concept, to understand the concept of how to do that motion, right? Yeah. Okay, great. So that was top 1. What is top 2?
I think just like I alluded to at the beginning, a mismatch with the company culture. If you find someone who, like we talked about, can they think about that company perspective, or are they going to optimize for just the sales team? That's going to run into problems really quickly. And so it's really important to me to make sure I'm hiring not just a sales leader, I'm hiring a leader for PandaDoc. They have to be both. I cannot just hire a single sales leader.
So I'm going to put you on the spot now. How do you actually do that? Because this is something that webinars talk a lot about, what you should and shouldn't do, but people rarely go into like, how do I actually do that work? Because obviously it's part of the interview process for you, I'm going to assume.
Yeah, I mean, I would give like a hypothetical or in a case. You were saying before you like to give cases. I like to give cases too, especially for senior, right? Maybe like a first line sales manager. Maybe I'm not going to case them. Maybe I'm just going to give them like a pipeline to scrub and tell me what they see there and explain stuff. But give them a case that includes some data that's going to cause you to make like a challenging decision, right? Like, what are the rules of engagement if it's a new business leader? But we see the expansion team is overperforming, like, hey, maybe they shouldn't have as long a window to work accounts after they've signed them. Like, I want to kind of like tee up this friction point and see how they're going to solve it. Or that PLG versus sales-led motion. Maybe I'm going to show them data that shows the PLG funnel is really strong, and the team is working small accounts today. And I want them to say they'll give up their small accounts, right? Because that's a good thing for the company leader to do, even if it means they have a smaller book of business. How can I like tease that out of them?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And this is the hard part about interviewing, right? Because you need to have several different specific questions to present, and then you're looking for very specific answers to these questions, right? George, what would you say? Because he gave 2 now. What would you say is the common mistakes that you have seen?
I have a few. The first thing that I've seen primarily with leaders, but also for any type of recruitment, is try your hardest to not be extremely biased in hiring people like yourself. I've seen a lot of CEOs, CROs, whatever C-level VPs hire people just because they're very similar to them. So you see the same demeanor, the same body language, the same kind of personality type. That might mean that you like them as people. It doesn't mean that, as Keith was talking about, that they're going to be a good culture fit, they're a good motion fit, or even that they're equipped to do the job. Because how you perform is very different to how other people will do the same job. So in general, avoid hiring people like yourself, because you also need diversity in your teams, right? You just don't want to clone yourself and have people sort of constantly agreeing with you in meetings. You want people to challenge you. For instance, looking at the color wheel, when I built the first enterprise team, now it is many years ago, I'm quite red and yellow person, as probably most of you have understood already. The first person that I wanted to hire is a very blue person, very analytical, very data-driven, very pragmatic, to sort of balance me out, right? So I think that is a very common mistake I've seen a lot of managers do. The second one is to not get overly, flattered or blinded by the logos that these people have in their resumes. Working at
Netflix
sales director at Microsoft, head of enterprise sales at Salesforce. This is great. It's great that they have that experience. Depending on the stage of your company, doesn't mean that it will translate necessarily. You might end up overpaying an underperforming leader because they had so much more manpower behind them to what they did. If you are hiring from Fortune 500 companies, and they will land in a SaaS company with 3 BDRs, 6 middle managers, and 12 salespeople, and it's like, okay, so you have to make do with this now. Usually doesn't translate.
And George, I think like one thing you made me think about, it's not just that they had huge resources, but when you work for a company, I'll take my alma mater, Google, like great, amazing company and very talented people, but all the demand comes to you. Maybe not in Google Cloud, that's much more competitive, but like if you are the #1 player in the space, people come to you. A good friend of mine says the fish jump in the boat. I want somebody who like knows how to catch the fish and like will hunt and go for it. And I think sometimes hiring from the dominant player in the space definitely doesn't make the best sales leader, because like the struggle, the challenge, like definitely builds character and builds perseverance that I think is one of the best things you can go hire for.
Yeah, exactly. No, but this is the thing. I see these as risk factors that usually affect how this hire goes. I'm not saying that somebody coming from Salesforce or Microsoft or whichever can, or HubSpot, can't succeed. Of course they can, but the risk is higher that it's going to be a mismatch. For instance, I have a story. I've interviewed. There was a period where Salesforce had a bit of turbulence in their middle management here in Europe. So I got to interview quite a few people, and based on what they told me, what I said in the interview is like, this is not going to be good for you. You're gonna drown in 2 weeks, based on workload, resources, dragging people in, because calling people and saying, hi, I'm calling from Salesforce. Yeah, thank you very much. Talking about a 20, 50, 60, 100 people company, very different skill sets. So yeah.
I think that if they leave that market leader because it's too slow, it might be worth discussing, right? Because you're getting frustrated, right? Because we're not moving fast enough. And I think that most people who go into those companies and stay for a longer time feels that the pace is good. And the pace is dependent on the fact that they are receiving the fish, so to say, rather than the fact that they need to go out with their teams to hunt the fish. And this is a really good example. But I think that when a person will leave a year and a half in and be like, I can't with these processes, it's too slow, then there might be an interesting discussion to have. But I think it also depends on where your company is, right? What stage your company is in.
Exactly.
Because if you're hiring your first sales leader and you're a startup and you're trying to find your first CRO and you're 50 people and you're going out onto the market, it's a very different skill set than a role like you have, Keith. Right? It's a very different skill set based on size and what is required, and also how many middle managers you have under you and how many direct reports you have, and all of these things are very different. So I would say one of the things that I think is a common mistake when hiring sales leaders is to have the process be way too complicated. And I'm not saying that we can't have a bunch of meetings throughout the hiring process, because we can, but we can have much more intentful meetings. Like, what is exactly what we're looking to get out of this specific session we're going to have? What are we looking for? And what is clear exit criteria for the candidate? And I feel like a lot of companies haven't really understood that they need, first of all, clear exit criteria. We're still sort of hiring even senior leaders on gut feeling of the people who are doing interviews. And this is not great, even if we complement with personality tests and stuff. We need to have a clear framework. This is like driving a sales process, because you're really needing to get this person in and to have a good fit so they don't churn. It's a very similar process, but it feels like the process is a bit more unclear on the recruitment side, internally when you're doing your own recruitment. It's different when you hire a firm, right? Can you guys agree that there is a bit too much gut feeling and a bit too little of exit criteria and process that is being followed? Yes? Okay, great. I got agreement on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always like, Sarah, I think sometimes we just jump into the interview phase. We're like, okay, we're going to go hire a VP of sales. And one of the things that I find really useful is to outline who's going to test for what and what are we going to look for. Like, part of my job as a hiring manager for any role is to say, this is what I want in this role. And then everyone who interviews for it gets assigned an area to go probe on. And then it becomes much more objective instead of like, wow, I really liked this person. Well, it almost doesn't matter if you like the person. Did they check the boxes on what I'm looking for? And if you can do that before you meet candidates, it helps you be objective in that process.
And I also think that the difference between running a sales process is like, there are of course obvious differences, but we have a lot of discovery training for companies. Me and George, we're doing discovery to make sure that SaaS companies can actually do discovery properly. I'm sure you guys are really excelling in this at PandaDoc. But as an example, when it comes to discovery, we're not there to be liked. We're there to be trusted. And this is the same side of concept. You're not here to like me. I'm not here to make you like me. I don't need to like you as a person, but I need to feel like we would be very good working together, right? So I think that this is an interesting thing. Another thing that I've seen a lot is that you hire for existing team. So you're looking at who are the people this person will manage, and you try to find a leader who fits that team. That team is not going to be in place in 2 years. Like, people move companies, and we might have a shrinking team. So we shouldn't take into consideration who they should lead. And we should also try to not take into consideration that we will lead them, because in 2 years we might not, and they should still function in the company, right? So these are the mistakes that I see are very common. I also agree with you guys when it comes to the other things that were mentioned, but I think that we need to have a clear idea of what we're looking to get out of the sessions when we go into an interview process. Because I also think that candidates feels a bit like, I don't know if this went well or not, which could lead people to drop out of the process instead of continuing, even though they are a good fit. We have 13 minutes left now. I want to do one more question because I've been thinking about this a lot. Me and George have been discussing it a lot. So how do you case study a leader? Because it's very easy to case study with salespeople, right? The people who are individual contributors, we can have them actually try to sell something to us and do a case study that way. But what do we do when we need to case study a leader? George, do you want to start?
No, I wanted to say that, first of all, because we talked about levels, or Keith talked about levels before, I'm annoying. I case everyone. From SDRs to VPs. I want to understand how people think, how they problem solve, how their mentality works. It doesn't need to be too extensive, but I think understanding the person's problem solving ability is super important. So when it comes to leadership, there are so many things you can do. I think the 30, 60, 90-day plan outlined is a good thing. Usually, on a deadline, I like to give cases with either 24 or 48 hours clock between when you receive it and when you present it. Also to understand how people work under pressure. Then there is, I want to look at conflict resolution skills. So we have X department says X, your team says Y, what do you do? As an example. Then you have, so do your research and provide me with 3 improvements we can do in Q4 to increase our ACV, as an example. Whatever you can scrape together, right? And it's not, as I say in the interviews, it's not a school assignment. You can get it wrong or you can get it right. What I suggest that people analyze is the boxes that Keith talked about, right? So whatever you're evaluating for, that you tailor your cases to test for that. So I care about empathy, I care about conflict resolution, and I care about execution. So I want to understand how people will potentially how they approach these topics. So that is my.
And we had a discussion, just to be a bit more concrete again now. We had a discussion about this yesterday where you case studied me with an actual example. Do you want to draw that? Again, this is something we can actually do in an interview when we're hiring for a VP sales, as an example. Because you were discussing if you were to hire me at Scribe, what would you give me as a case study when it comes to a customer-facing situation? Do you remember?
No, because I'm
Okay,
old and
so
my
the case-
memory is garbage. So you will need to remind me.
Yes, the case was, so a customer calls you as a leader of a team and is upset with the person they had a meeting with, right?
Right.
You want to take over? Yes.
Yeah. No, but this is a good example of conflict resolution, right? So, and empathy, in my opinion. So you had the reaction to that where I had some notes. So I want to understand, first of all, are you gonna stand, like the point of that question is, how are you going to balance standing up for your team? So your instinct is not to throw them under the bus and say, so no, absolutely, the customer is always right. We screwed up. I will just fix it. Is to understand what happened. So analyze, try to de-escalate if you're getting shouted at. It's like, no, it's not great to shout at me or my team, even if, I don't know, the service went down or whatever. Try to get the facts of the case. And then how are you going to position something like that to your team? What are you going to advise them to do? Are you going to, for instance, I can ask, actually, it's interesting. I will ask Keith because we had a disagreement yesterday. So let's say that I'm a customer of yours. I'm an important customer of yours, and I'm calling you and I'm saying, is success, if it is a success rep, a CS rep, and I tell you that I spoke to Sarah, she was terrible, and this is my complaints. Would you pull her off the case out of this call?
Generally, no, unless it's like, I want to understand first, was it an isolated incident? Was it something systemic? What was the cause of it? I tend to try to always back my team members, but I want to understand the customer's concern. So like, what did Sarah do wrong? Oh, let me address that with her. Sarah's one of my best reps. Like, I will make sure that we take care of this, but I know that she's going to give you a great customer experience. So like, how can I support and address your concern, which is not really about Sarah. It's about, you're not getting what you need. Let me help you get what you need. And I'm going to have Sarah get there to deliver it for you. That's what I try to do. Now, if it happens a couple times, yeah, I'll pull the rep, but I try to make sure, like,
if it happens multiple times, it's time to evaluate the rep altogether, but
exactly.
No, but that's really interesting, because my response, because we also talked about what it says about your experience with different motions, right? When it comes to mid-market versus SMB, what size of companies you've been at, how many reps you have. Because in this situation, I would have responded, so I hear you, I understand what happened, give me more details. Then I would say, so I need to investigate what happened. So I will come back to you by the end of the day, but let me look at what's actually going on, right? And then I would have talked to the person managing the account, and I would have swapped them for their own. And then we identified that I did that because I have been in organizations where there was an ability to swap, because I had enough reps to be able to just swap them because they had so many accounts each, it wouldn't make a big difference, etc. And if you're working with a very tight-knitted team on the enterprise level or high mid segment, you might only have a few different people who can actually take that role. And you might only have one who is really good at whatever ICP that is in the industry vertical, right? So this sort of indicates also what you're used to and what experiences you have, how you respond to this. And this is a very concrete way of testing it, right? I find it super interesting as a case.
Because what you're casing is, you can case with questions like that, you can case several things. It's analytical ability, is how you qualify, how you solve conflicts. Are you empathetic, or are you going to hear both sides, or are you just going to throw your rep under the bus and say, yeah, so no, he seems terrible. I know. Oh my God, I have so many problems. Which I would ask as a customer, why do you have her around them? But because I've seen that in a lot of cases, not in my teams, but I've seen it in customers as an example.
I think it also speaks to customer centricity, right? Because if you are an organization that is putting the customer in focus, what does that mean for the leader that you're getting in, right? Because this case also talks about what being customer centric means to them. Because customer centric might mean for me that I will switch the reps around because the customer is always right, or it means that for the customer's best interest, this rep is the best fitted. We need to solve the conflict because that's what is long-term customer centric, right? So you can get so much out of a small situation, a small case, to discuss with the person you're trying to hire. Do you have any examples like that, Keith, when it comes to like concretely what you can? I'm trying to give the audience things that they can actually do, right? So concretely things that you would have run through in a hiring process.
So I think one of the first questions I'll ask in a hiring process is of myself, am I replacing someone who's left for another job, but things are going well? Or am I taking someone, like, am I trying to really change what I'm doing and fix what I'm doing? Because it, like the way my case develops, even if the data is actually the same, the questions I ask are going to be a little bit different. So if I'm trying to fully revamp the operations, I'm going to give them all the data and it's going to be like, I don't think we're living up to our potential. What do you see in the data and what would you do? It's going to be like really open-ended because I want to see where they're going to dive in and what they can find as the problem. Like I may have a hypothesis of what the problem is, but for a senior leader, I want them to be able to identify the problem, suggest a solution, and then give me examples using the data of how they get there. For, hey, you're taking over from someone great who just decided to go to another company, I might just say, you know, my number one priority is raising the ACV of, you know, the average ACV. What would you do? And then I'm giving them like more examples of sales calls and I'm giving them like pipeline and it's maybe like a little more zeroed in. So like, I think a bit of direction leading and maybe like a little bit more in the case, like, tell me about your vision. How do you run a sales team? Versus like, what will you do with this mess of a situation that I've got?
I completely get it. And I think this is a really good advice. I would also add one more thing that I have added to hiring processes in conversations with the person I'm trying to hire, which is related to who are the two hardest people that you have managed and how did that go? Because one of the things I, as a leader, I want challenging people in my teams. I want them to challenge me when I need to be challenged, right? So when you have a bit of challenge with a team member, you need to have different ways of approaching it depending on who that person is, right? And I think asking for the top two most hard to manage hires that you've had in your teams, how did you do that? It gives you a width of understanding of how they, because some leaders will go only on how they lead, adapt to nothing and just go their race, right? And some leaders are very adaptable. And obviously, if we have a team that is supposed to be diverse in different ways to make the team better, we need a way to make sure that the leader can adapt to a certain extent. Of course, you have your style, but at the end of the day, we're trying to get a bunch of different people to move in the same direction. And we need to understand. So that would be a question as a small, like situational leadership. What did you do? Because everyone has tough team members at some point or another in your leader career. If you've been a leader before, at least I have, and I'm sure you guys have too, most of us have. And how we handle it is a super important thing. It's the same with focusing on sales teams when they have underperformers, mid-performers, and top performers. Where do we spend our time, right? George, you said, looked like you had something to add.
Yeah, I wanted to. It's not about questions. It's more about the next step after the case, which is, to me, is references. And I've seen so many customers of ours and so many companies primarily do references from either laterally or upwards. So their manager or their peers. I really want to hear from their team members how they were as a leader. If they felt motivated, if they performed well, how they felt in that environment. I think this is quite important to me. And it tells usually a bit of a different story than you get from that person's manager.
I think a lot of people don't do backdoor references on team members. Have you done that before, Keith?
Yeah, I have. I mean, I think it's always important to get those views, right? It just provides a completely different perspective And you want that. You want to understand how that framing is coming in.
I completely agree. So this has been a very interesting session. We have about 30 seconds left. I have a few commentaries, but I don't have any questions. One of the comments is, one of the things I'm keen to understand is the process behind the sales. I'm going to guess that this is from I am trying to be recruited or getting recruited in the hiring process. Example, how they prepare for a call or planning the planning systems they have and the processes they have. And this is, again, curiosity in the sales leader we're trying to hire. I think that to summarize this in a way where it sort of gives everyone something to take away home is, you have probably not put as much into your hiring process as you should. You should probably, as a leader now, if you're hiring sales leaders, as a CEO, CRO, or even CMO, if you're hiring middle management, because a lot of these things are not just for sales leaders, it's also for leaders in general. You should probably go sit down and have a sift through your own process and discuss with yourself, is this really meeting what we're trying to achieve? And obviously, if you have a very low churn on employees and everyone's performing, then you probably have a good process. If it is a struggle, then there's probably something in the process of finding the right people that is not really playing the game that you wanted to play, right? So that would be my takeaway from this session. Thank you so much, guys, for a great, interesting discussion. Let's wish everyone good luck hunting out their new sales leaders. And I appreciate your time. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye, guys.
Thank you.